There was sort of an incident that happened I've talked about it. Brad Pitt sort of broke up. A
Oh.
tense moment that, from what I recall, he pulled out one of his teeth
I think I heard that.
before we even started shooting.
For years, there was a story that refused to die. It moved through fan forums, late-night podcast clips, and whispered conversations among people who had worked on a certain World War II film, set more than a decade ago. Two young actors, a tank, a moment that supposedly came close to turning physical. Nobody would say out loud on the record, but everybody in a certain corner of Hollywood seemed to know it happened. Now, at 40 years old, Scott Eastwood has finally said it himself. And the way he told it changes everything we thought we knew. Stick with us, because this isn't just about one old rumor. This is about a man who spent a decade letting a story sit unfinished, and who suddenly decided this was a year to close it out, along with at least one more secret that's still only half told. Every actor who survives a brutal shoot seems to carry one story out of it that never quite lets go. For Scott Eastwood, that story began in 2014 on the set of Fury, the World War II tank drama that paired him with Brad Pitt, Logan Lerman, Michael Pena, and a young Shia LaBeouf. By the time cameras rolled, LaBeouf had already built a reputation for pushing his performances into uncomfortable territory. Playing a battle-hardened gunner nicknamed Bible, he reportedly went to extremes that unsettled even seasoned crew members, having a tooth pulled to feel closer to a soldier who'd lost in combat, and cutting his own face rather than letting a makeup artist fake a wound. Logan Lerman has described watching him slip away during a makeup session with a blade in hand, coming back with a real cut instead of a fabricated one. For Eastwood, still building his career at the time, that kind of intensity wasn't something to admire from a safe distance. It was something he had to work next to every day. Over the years, he dropped small hints in interviews about Fury being a tense shoot, just enough to keep the rumor alive without ever actually confirming what tense meant. Entertainment writers noticed, fans noticed, and because nothing ever got denied outright, the story just kept circulating, gathering weight the way half-finished stories always do. It didn't help that LaBeouf's off-screen life gave the rumor plenty of company. In the years since Fury, he's faced multiple arrests, was sued by a former partner over abuse allegations that he eventually settled, and has been described by more than one collaborator as brilliant, but genuinely difficult to be around on set. None of that proved the old Fury story was true, but it made it easy to believe, and easy for the story to survive another year without anyone actually confirming it. That changed recently, when Eastwood sat down for a long, unusually candid conversation that finally gave the rumor a name, a scene, and real words attached to it. The confirmation came during an appearance on Dax Shepard's Armchair Expert podcast, in an episode that wandered through Eastwood's whole life story. Growing up between Carmel and Hawaii, getting kicked out of school as a teenager after a run-in involving an illegal marijuana operation, and working his way through college as a barback long before acting ever felt like a realistic path. But it was the Fury section of the conversation that people are still talking about. Eastwood didn't dress it up. He described a moment on set where tension boiled over so badly that Brad Pitt had to physically step between him and LaBeouf. According to Eastwood, the whole thing started over something almost absurdly small, a scripted moment where his character was supposed to spit tobacco off the back of the tank. LaBeouf apparently took issue with it, and Eastwood, for his part, wasn't willing to back down over a line that was simply written on the page and had nothing to do with any personal disrespect. What had been implied for a decade suddenly had actual dialogue attached to it. Eastwood recalled telling LaBeouf bluntly to knock it off, and when that didn't land the way he wanted, he says he told him flat out that he'd fight him right there on set. That's when Pitt reportedly stepped in and physically separated the two of them before things escalated any further. It's worth noting that this lines up with something Pitt himself has said in the past, in a separate interview with GQ, where he joked that the cast was simply following what was written in the script and got swept up in an argument they hadn't started. Two accounts, given years apart, by two different people who were both standing right there, and they match. For a rumor that had spent a decade floating around without a single first-hand source willing to put a name to it. That's about as close to confirmation as it gets. What's interesting is how Eastwood chose to frame the whole thing. He wasn't interested in dragging LaBeouf's talent through the mud, and he didn't try to paint himself as a hero of the story either. If anything, There was a kind of respect in how he talked about the intensity LaBeouf brought to that role. He just made it clear he had no interest in matching it. His point, more or less, was that there are plenty of ways to give a powerful performance without hurting yourself or putting the people around you on edge. It read less like a takedown and more like a boundary he'd been quietly holding on to since 2014, one he finally felt ready to put into words. Once outlets picked up on exactly which former co-star Eastwood was describing, the years-old rumor mill finally had something concrete to work with. The tension was real, the confrontation was real, and the two men at the center of it were exactly who longtime fans had suspected all along. But here's the part that a lot of people miss. That wasn't even the only story Eastwood cleared up this year. If the Fury story was Eastwood settling something from his 20s, his appearance on Joe Rogan's podcast revealed something far more recent and far less resolved. Speaking with Rogan while promoting his new film Lucky Strike, Eastwood described working on a project alongside a well-known actor who abruptly walked away from the film after real money had already been put into it. He never said the name, and when Rogan offered to let him say it on record and simply cut out the final episode afterward, Eastwood still turned him down. That refusal alone was enough to send clips of the segment circulating online, with fans and entertainment writers trying to piece together exactly who he might have been talking about. What he did share was pointed. He described the actor as someone who had been famous for so long that they started to believe the industry, and the people who had financially backed the project, owed them something, regardless of what they'd already agreed to do. According to Eastwood, the film had a director already attached when the actor decided they no longer wanted to work with that person and simply exited the project, despite the story reportedly being built around their own life and their own creative input from the beginning. Eastwood didn't hold back on how he felt about it. He pushed back hard on the idea that fame gives anyone a pass to walk away from a commitment, arguing that if someone backs out after money has already been spent, the least they can do is pay it back rather than just disappearing. When that apparently wasn't the response he got, it left him thinking about something bigger than just one bad experience, a pattern he believes runs through the industry, where well-known people get excused from basic professional accountability, while the smaller collaborators and investors around them absorb the fallout. It's a theme that fits with how Eastwood has talked about his own career for years. Someone trying to build something separate from his father's towering legacy, while still holding on to the same blunt, no-nonsense values that have defined the Eastwood name for decades. He said before that watching his father operate on set taught him early that fame is a poor substitute for actually doing the work, showing up, staying prepared, and treating a film set like a workplace instead of a stage built around ego. He went even further in that same conversation, drawing a sharp line between being rich, which he described as genuinely worth chasing, and being famous, which he called a distorted goal that hollows out the ordinary parts of a person's life. Growing up around his father's level of celebrity gave him a front-row seat to exactly how ugly that side of the business can get, long before he ever had to live through it himself as a working actor. 2 stories, one from over a decade ago, one from just this year, both finally addressed on the record within months of each other. And that timing says something about exactly where Eastwood is in his life right now. To understand why any of this matters, it helps to know where he came from. He was born Scott Clinton Reeves on March 21st, 1986, in Monterey, California, the son of Hollywood legend Clint Eastwood and former flight attendant Jacelyn Reeves. He spent much of his childhood splitting time between Carmel by the Sea and Hawaii, largely outside the spotlight that followed his father's decades-long career, and by most accounts grew up with fairly grounded, ordinary upbringing despite who his dad was. Early on, he made a deliberate choice to use his mother's surname, Reeves, rather than lean on his father's fame. He wanted roles based on his own merit, not his last name. That decision shaped his earliest credited work, including small parts in 2 of his father's own films, Flags of Our Fathers and Gran Torino, before he eventually started using the Eastwood name professionally once it became clear the connection was impossible to hide anyway. His real breakthrough came with The Longest Ride in 2015, the Nicholas Sparks adaptation that put him in front of a much wider audience and established him as a leading man in his own right. That same year, he stepped into a role that would follow him for the next decade regardless of how many action franchises he joined afterward, appearing in Taylor Swift's Wildest Dreams music video after she reportedly called him directly to offer him the part, without the 2 of them ever having met beforehand. According to later interviews, his own representatives actually discouraged him from taking it, worried it would brand him as little more than a pop star's love interest instead of a serious actor. He took the role anyway, and nearly a decade later, he said he has no regrets about going against that advice, even joking that castmates on more recent projects have discovered the connection mid-shoot without realizing it beforehand. From there, his filmography grew into the kind of big-budget action work that built his mainstream profile. Suicide Squad, The Fate of the Furious, Pacific Rim Uprising, and Fast X, while he continued mixing in smaller, more personal projects that let him step outside his father's long shadow. That balancing act, blockbuster paychecks alongside passion projects, has become something of a signature for him as his career has matured. Turning 40 has also pushed him into more honest territory about getting older in an industry that rarely rewards that kind of honesty. In one conversation, he admitted that his fitness routine has shifted noticeably now that he's in his 40s, with recovery taking priority over pure intensity, and said he seriously considered testosterone support just to stay competitive physically in a business built around appearance. He still keeps a demanding routine. Strength training, jiu-jitsu, Muay Thai, swimming, yoga, but isn't upfront about the fact that even small things, like simply getting out of bed some mornings, take more effort than they used to. Outside of acting, he's built a small business portfolio that includes an American-made clothing brand and his own whiskey label, both reflecting the same understated, workmanlike attitude he brings to interviews about fame and the industry. His recent signing with a major talent agency, timed around the release of Lucky Strike, his new World War II drama directed by Rod Lurie and co-starring Colin Hanks and Anjanou Ellis-Taylor, signals another step in expanding both his acting and producing career, with reports suggesting he wants to start developing his own original projects rather than simply taking on whatever comes his way. Through all of it, his relationship with his father has remained a constant thread, even as retirement speculation swirled around Clint Eastwood earlier this year. Following comment from Scott's half-brother Kyle, Scott made clear in his own interviews that he hadn't heard anything definitive from his father directly. He's spoken about his dad's decade-spanning body of work, producing, writing, composing, directing, acting, as something that still inspires him today. It's shaped the way he talks about his own career, treating his father less like a shadow to escape and more like a standard he keeps measuring himself against. Put it all together, and what you get isn't really a scandal. There was no lawsuit tied to the Fury incident, no official statement from a studio, no tabloid headline built on anonymous sources. It was two young actors who reportedly clashed over how far a performance should go, a disagreement that stayed sealed for over 10 years simply because nobody involved was ready to talk about it. What changed is Eastwood himself. Turning 40 seems to have loosened something in him, a willingness to finally close the loop on a story from his 20s, and an equal willingness to speak candidly, even without naming names, about something that happened just this year. Confirming one rumor and half confirming another within the same stretch of interviews says something about where he is right now. Less interested in guarding old stories, more interested in being straightforward about who he is and what he's willing to put up with. Whether the identity of that unnamed co-star ever comes out is anyone's guess. But if the Fury story is any indication, Eastwood isn't the type to let a half-told story sit forever. Sooner or later, on his own terms, he tends to finish it.